Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Gollier, and I moved to New York City this year. But before I did, I turned to Google and YouTube to get an idea of the costs of living in the city. But a lot of what I found was wrong. It portrayed New York City as much more expensive and much less accessible than it truly is. So I'm making the kinds of videos that I wish I had had access to before I moved here. The standard New York City story that floats around our culture is something like, it's ridiculously expensive, or you'll have to live in some basement level rat hole apartment, at least until you're a hedge fund manager. And that's all very depressing if you want to move here, or if you were planning to do so, which I was starting in the middle of last year. So, preparing for the worst, I went to Google and YouTube and I typed in moving to NYC. I thought that vloggers on the ground in the city would give me a true idea of the real costs of living in the city. And while there were some good videos, a lot of the very popular ones that I saw claiming to tell me the true cost of living here were not only mistaken, they were recklessly misleading. As soon as I saw what I thought were some clear errors in basic math on their part, I knew that I wanted to make a video like this. Now, the cost of living in New York City is a huge subject. To do a proper evidence-based exploration of this topic would take hours of video, which I do intend to do. But first, I want to show you a few of the things that consistently jumped out to me as being very obviously wrong, and I want to do it in a way that gives you the information and means to double-check what I'm showing you on your own. First, let's talk about the cost of food. When I was still outside of New York City planning to move here, one of the things that I wish I had was a video that went through a grocery store and had pictures or video of a wide variety of food, all with their price tags. Because something like that would let me get a really good sense for what food actually costs without just a one-liner that says food is expensive, and it would allow me, using that inventory, to construct a good estimated food budget for myself. Unlike clothing or electronic stores, groceries don't really have as reliable data online, so it's difficult to feel or trust that you have a good grip on what food prices actually are in an area unless you're able to stand in a grocery store, walk around, and look for yourself. So, in the video description below, you'll find links to photo albums and a web page that have exactly the kind of inventory you might want if you're YouTubing, moving to New York, and looking for food prices. I went to several grocery stores, took pictures of a wide variety of foods and their prices, and have an explanation and breakdown of everything that you'll need to trust that you have a good grip on what food prices can be in the city, and so you can construct an estimated budget of your own. Because, you know what? At the end of the day, food in Manhattan is not really any more expensive than most parts of the country. Now, of course, there are exceptions, but they're exceptions. Food here is actually very reasonably priced. Does that seem wrong to you? Well, let's look into it. This is the island of Manhattan, and I know New York City is more than just Manhattan. It's Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. The reason why I'm focusing on Manhattan here is because that's where I live, and because stereotypically, it's the most expensive part of the city. So if food can be cheap here, it can be cheap anywhere. Trader Joe's, for those unfamiliar, is a grocery store with a wide variety of quality food, all at reasonable price points. For example, when I went shopping here at the beginning of the year, eggs were $1.69 a dozen. When I went at the beginning of this month, they were $1.29 a dozen, and when I went yesterday, they were only $1 a dozen. Now, food prices change, we all know that, but any of those prices is definitely reasonable enough to construct a good food budget for anyone, and they're prices that are comparable with many other places in the country. Another example, you can find a pound-and-a-half loaf of whole wheat bread for $1.99. Once again, comparable with any other part of the country. This is a reminder, just look in the link below and you'll find a fuller inventory for much more food and many more price points. A quick Google Maps search of Trader Joe's will reveal that there are multiple on the island of Manhattan. And if you push out a 1-mile radius from each store, within which is the maximum walking distance that most people will go for groceries, you'll see that a good portion of the island is very close to one of these stores, and therefore reasonable grocery prices. But you might say that Trader Joe's leaves much of the island of Manhattan uncovered. And it does. But there's another grocery store, Key Foods, that picks up most of the balance. In my opinion, Key Foods doesn't have prices that quite match those of Trader Joe's, but they are still perfectly reasonable, and they definitely explode the myth of outrageously expensive groceries in Manhattan. So if you push out a 1-mile radius from all of these stores as well, combined with Trader Joe's, you'll see that most of the island lives within a reasonable walking distance of affordable groceries. And if you want to go to Trader Joe's, but you live in Inwood or at the top of the island of Manhattan, well, it's just a subway ride away. That's what early Saturday and Sunday mornings are for. But this really isn't a video about food, and there is so much more to say about this topic. What I wanted to do was give you enough information to see that, generally, there is cheap and quality food all over the island of Manhattan. Now you might wonder what that means for my budget specifically. What are the numbers? Well, I spend usually somewhere around $200 to $250 a month on food. Say $300 as an absolute high point. I'm a 6'1", almost 28-year-old young man, and I run quite a lot. So there's a reasonable chance that your food budget is going to be lower than mine. But the upshot and takeaway is, if you're Googling or YouTubing around and you have a video that allocates more than $400 a month as absolutely necessary to buy food in Manhattan, or buy groceries at least, be very suspicious, because that's much higher than I spend, and I think that's much higher than most people would need to spend, absent some kind of specific requirement. And the last thing that I want to tell you about food before moving on, if anyone ever tells you, in person, on video, or otherwise, that ordering seamless or eating out is cheaper in Manhattan than buying and preparing your own food, that's insane. They're so wrong. Moving on. Let's look at budget breakdowns as I have found them to be commonly presented on YouTube, and we'll see how they're not only wrong, but they're impossible. The math just doesn't work out. This is a prospective New York City budget put up by a popular YouTuber that's supposed to be on the low end of things. If you're interested in seeing it in its context, the link is in the video description. Now there's a lot to say about building budgets for New York, and since this isn't really a video about housing, I'm going to skip a lot of those things. But there are a few basic rules about budgeting for the city that I want to emphasize. The first thing, this list just isn't comprehensive enough to be realistic. The video explains that this is a studio that's being split between two people, and this is half of the total rent, or the rent per person. Food shouldn't cost this much. The electric doesn't have to be that high, and it would be split between two people, as the rent is. The internet wouldn't be that high, and would be split between two people, as the rent is. Transportation should probably allocate $127 for a monthly MTA pass just to be safe. Most people don't have to pay office rent. This shouldn't be in an itemized monthly budget since it's a one-time purchase. For most people, this seems a little low. And when he says give or take some here, he took quite a bit, because there is no line for savings, there's no line for debt payments like a student loan or credit card, which many people have, there's no line for miscellaneous but regularly occurring expenses like laundry, haircuts, or purchasing toiletries, there is no line for miscellaneous expenses that occur rarely, but at least one of which likely occurs in any given month, like renewing a driver's license, taking a pet to the vet, buying a new pair of work boots, etc. There is no subscription line for Netflix, Hulu, Dollar Shave Club, the gym, or whatever else you might have, and some of these things might come out of the entertainment budget for some. And there is no line for renter's insurance. But all of these things collectively aren't even the biggest problem with this budget, because if you're planning to move to New York, certain situations aside, you will run into this fact. Most landlords require that your annual before-tax income be at least 40 times your monthly rent. If you have a guarantor co-signing your lease, that 40 becomes an 80 for their income, but let's focus on the 40 scenario. For example, if rent is $1,000 a month, you would have to prove that you earn $40,000 a year for your rental application. Keeping this 40 times rule in mind, let's take a closer look at this budget. We'll start with the amount that is allocated for rent, and since this is split between two people, both would have to have the qualifying income we're about to derive. Rent is $1,125 a month. Times 40 per the standard rule, that means you would have to make at least $45,000 a year to qualify for this apartment. So you might say, cool, to have this budget, I just need to make $45,000. But not so fast. Whether or not this budget is even feasible means taking taxes and benefits like health insurance into account. Your net pay, not your before tax pay. Let's assume that your take-home pay then is about 70% of your paycheck, which I think is reasonable for New York. That means you'll be left with 70% of $45,000, which comes to $31,500. Now, if we take the $31,500 you actually bring home and divide it by 12 months in the year, we see that in fact, you have $2,625 each month to spend. And how much does this budget cost per month? $2,671, or $46 too much based on the amount of rent it stipulates and a reasonable estimated take-home pay. And it doesn't even include the long list of things I think are missing. My conclusion: this budget is not only wrong, it severely ill-equips potential New Yorkers to plan for their move to the city. In the video description below, I include a link to a calculator that does all of this math for you. You can put in your estimated rent payment and it'll produce a workable budget number, in addition to telling you how much you'll have to make to qualify for that rent. Or you could put in your estimated annual income and it will tell you the maximum rent you can qualify for. If you're looking on YouTube and a budget is missing this kind of analysis, it's probably missing a lot more. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe down below. Or leave a comment letting me know what New York cost of living you would like more information about. Better yet, share this video with your friends so they can comment and do the same. I plan to do videos that have deeper dives on other costs of living like transportation, rent, getting and keeping an apartment, and food, both for those who like to cook and for those who don't. In addition to the resources linked down below, I'll leave you with 2 quick tips. Number 1, if anyone flashes a list of expenses on a screen and tells you that that's a budget for living in New York City, be very suspicious, because in my experience, most of those people don't know what they're talking about. And number 2, run for your life from anyone who tells you that Seamless is cheaper than buying and preparing your own food in New York City. I've been Daniel Gollier, and see you next time.